everybody, this is Nathaniel Provincia with always my great friend Dr. Worster, and we
Hey,
have another Mr. P on the show, right? Pondiscio. What's going on, Robert? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Those of us whose last names ends in a vowel and whose first names become initials in classrooms, we understand each other.
I love so it. Listen, we always start off our shows typically with an origin story. Eric and I are sucker for origin stories. You've got a very non-traditional, unique educational pedagogical
Okay.
journey. If you could just
Okay.
share a little bit, man,
Yeah,
about that, that'd be
sure.
awesome.
Teaching is what I have sometimes jokingly called my mid-career impulse purchase.
Mm,
I had a whole other life in the media world. I did radio news while I was taking a semester off from college and never went back.
mm,
And I ended up working in the magazine business. I worked at Time and Business Week. And then in 2002, frankly, not that long after 9/11 in New York City, I was seduced, so to speak, by an ad on
mm,
the subway that for a program called the New York City Teaching Fellows, kind of like
mm,
it is an alt-cert program.
mm.
Um, and the ad on the subway, I'll never forget it. Coming home after a bad day at work, it said, "You remember your first grade teacher's name. Who will remember yours?" Like, oh, that's good.
That's a
That's
damn good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's
right.
good. Yeah,
Good
that's
ad
good.
copy. I'd been involved, still am in not-for-profit work in the South Bronx, and a lot of it was surrounding education. So all things just kept coming up education, and that ad on the subway just hit me at the right time, and I signed up for this program, and I've joked it's kind of like playing the game show Survivor. They kept not voting me off the island as I went through
Mm,
the process. And at some point, I remember thinking, well, if they're dumb enough to hire me, I'm dumb enough to do it.
there you
And
go.
ended up teaching in the South Bronx. It was supposed to be, when I call it my impulse purchase, it was supposed to be like a 2-year mid-career kind of do-gooder public service stint.
Mm,
It got into my blood, as it does for so many of us. 2 years turned into 5, 5 years turned into a collection of ideas about, curriculum and school culture and whatnot. And I never left the business. So now,
mm,
now it's going on 25 years. And like I said, this was never going to be my second career.
mm.
But here we are.
Robert, you have a great Substack called The Next 30 Years.
Thank you.
In your Substack article that came out today, it's called The Voices We Don't Hear,
Yeah.
Teachers Who Gave Up. And you write about the importance of listening to those who didn't stay in the profession.
Yeah.
While every decision is personal on why people quit, what trends do you hear the most?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, thanks for pointing people to the Substack. It's called The Next 30 Years because, I work in the ed reform space. Do we still call it that? I'm not even sure that it's still a thing.
I didn't even know
Um,
if we ever called it that.
Fair enough.
No.
But the point of ed reform for years has been structural changes, charter schools, testing, accountability.
Mhm.
I've been the weirdo who's been saying for a long time now, hey, can we talk about what the kids do all day? Like, can we talk
Great.
about
Yep.
curriculum and instruction? So my point is, if we'd spent the last 30 years talking about that stuff, we'd probably be further along. So let's spend the next 30 years talking about what the kids do all day and how to get better results, through curriculum and pedagogy and whatnot.
Yep.
But yeah, to get to your specific question, I was at a conference last week, and just discussing exactly this, honestly, this idea that we should be talking about, curriculum and instruction. And there was a panel of teachers and administrators who were kind of, gently pushing back and saying, well, yeah, Pondiscio is not wrong. It's not, it's a hard job, but it's not impossible. And pointing out things that we wish we all had, certainly that I wish I had when I
Mm.
was a teacher: a good curriculum, supportive colleagues,
Yep.
administration who is instructionally savvy, etc. So when it was my turn to talk, I said, can we just be clear about something? What these women, they were 4 women, were
Mm.
just saying, you're not gainsaying what I said, you're illustrating it. In other words, we don't all have those things. So gee, wouldn't it be interesting if just one time you went to a conference like this and you heard a panel of educators who tried their best and it didn't work out for them,
Mm.
which I think is probably a lot more common. I don't need to tell
Yes.
you guys, half of
Yep.
all teachers leave within 5 years.
Mm.
Aren't we a little curious as to why that is?
Should be.
Yeah, or at least, it should come up more, frankly, in policy discussions. And I don't have the data at arm's length, but it's not always the things we assume. It's not teacher pay, for example. It's
Yep.
behavior. It's the job requirements. I mean, I've described for years having to spend, 20 or 30, 20, 10, 20, 30 hours a week, staring at that empty plan book, going on
Mm,
the internet, looking for materials. Why the
mm,
hell was I not given a curriculum? On and
mm.
on and on. So,
Yep.
I think there's clearly a problem, and we haven't solved it yet with teachers, finding out that hey, this is, I can't keep up with this, but not really addressing those problems. Instead, kind of talking about, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for paying teachers more
Sure.
money, but
Yep.
that doesn't mean you're going to solve those other problems. You can't solve them even if you pay them twice. It doesn't add more hours to a teacher's day.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that pay gets them in the door, but it doesn't keep them there if they don't have all those other things that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. What I've
Yeah.
said for years, teaching is
Yeah.
the easiest job in the world to do badly, right?
Mm,
Like if you want to, and look, I could still be a PS 277 in the South Bronx right now, just phoning it in, and nobody would say boo. But if it's
yeah.
the hardest job in the world to do well.
Love that quote. Love that quote.
Do do you think that like I think we need to do a better postmortem when, and this is more for like HR folks maybe, who might be listening, like we always have that exit interview, but we don't have these interviews along the way. And
Mhm.
I always find this very interesting and a little disheartening that we wait till someone leaves before we find out really what's going on with them. Does that make sense, Robert? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And look, at the risk of sounding contradictory, it is a hard job. So, I mean, if, you're always going to hear about ways that we could support teachers better. I don't, this is never going to be an easy job, again, at least
Right.
not to do it well. But yeah, your point is well taken. There should be a way. And I've seen savvy administrators do this. They have a good fingertip feel for their staff. They know when somebody needs to be kind of talked off the ledge, so to
Yeah.
speak, while still recognizing, like, look, there are easier ways to make a living. But the point we'd also don't highlight enough is when this job goes well, man, it's great, right?
Oh,
I
it's
mean, there's
great.
better feeling than going home after a good day, whether you connected with the kids and you feel like there's good stuff happening in your classroom. And it always used to amaze me, like the teaching gods kind of always knew when you needed one of those days. Like you have
Yes.
had two or three really bad ones, and you're thinking, maybe Starbucks is hiring. And then you get that great day, and you're like, I wouldn't leave this job to go to heaven.
Yep.
Man, there's one thing that I hate is being condescended to.
Just one thing?
Just one thing. If there's one thing, Robert, that I hate, it's being
Okay.
condescended to. I think we
Okay.
condescend way too much in education. Like find your
Oh,
why, you know what I mean? And like you're a superhero, you're a rock star, you know what I mean? And like what? Like I don't feel like a rock star. There's
somebody,
no red carpet, there's rock star. I
somebody
just got
said, I don't know who said this, but I heard this recently. Like if your profession has an appreciation day, that
oh,
means you're not getting paid enough.
I see
Uh,
this too, man. Teacher Appreciation Week. I'm like, where the hell were you the other 170 days? What's going
yeah.
on? And I always feel bad. Like I have a lot of great friends that are on administrators and they're in like NAESP and they go to the Hill and they advocate for the profession. And it's like, what? Guys, come on, And then but Sarah
Oh,
Oberly.
I was just gonna invoke her name. Thank you.
Yeah, she's got this quote. Stop telling me to find my why or calling me a superhero. The messages are manipulative and perpetuate a culture of condescension.
Oh,
I agree with
yeah,
that.
no, she wrote that up for my Substack, and
Yep.
she's just magnificent. I just was just yesterday pointing out to her that piece that she wrote, which is about professional development and about this condescension, is one of the most popular pieces I've run on that Substack. So I was just needling her, saying, "So Sarah, what's your next piece about?" Because
Hmm.
we need her voice and more voices like hers.
I go to a lot of conferences and like speaking engagements and everything, and like you'll get that keynote that's like, we just gotta love them more. If we just, you know, it's Disney World. We just gotta love them more, and we just gotta build relationships and find our why and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I mean, like God, if we need those messages, man, like
Yeah.
if we're
That's
paying
great, but
someone,
what do I do with that?
what do
How
I
does that make
do?
me better?
We've known each other 5 minutes, but I think you already get the idea that I can have a slight sarcastic
Sure.
edge to me,
Love
which you
it.
guys seem to be enabling. Yeah, I've made this point for years. Like, if you don't naturally like children, if you're not empathetic, you're not signing up on career day for the table that says elementary school teacher. You're
Right.
lining up at the table that says lighthouse keeper, you know, or accountant or something. Like, people, I'm not saying there's not people in our work who don't like kids, but they usually don't start out that way, right?
Yeah.
The idea that, you can hug them to Harvard, as they used to say, or like,
Mm.
or what is this other cliche that just drives me up the walls, that they won't care what you know until they know that you care. I
Mm.
actually got this not
Classic.
that long ago as well. This idea that, and we do teachers a real disservice, to be serious about it for a moment, to
Yep.
to to communicate this message that, you have to connect with your kids and get them to like you, and you have to like them before you can teach them anything. I mean, it's a lovely sentiment.
Yeah.
It appeals to our empathetic side, but it's just not so.
Mm. Mm. Love it.
You can be the teacher who's very well loved and not teach them the things they need to know. So that is certainly true.
I'm laughing because there was an AP at my old school who one day thought she was, insulting me by referring to me as an authoritarian teacher. And I said, thank you. Like, yeah, my class has rules. Yeah, there's orderly stuff going on here. Yeah, they wear the uniforms. Yeah, we learn stuff. Thanks very much.
And the question should be, are the kids learning? Because
Of
at
course.
least for me, that's my question. I'm open to teachers having a variety of styles. My
Amen.
question, are they learning with that style? And if it's
Right.
yes, then that's what I want. So I don't care if you do things differently from how I might do them or how I would teach it in the hall. Are the students learning? The answer is yes. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, Eric, I might push back on that slightly. I mean, I
Go ahead.
completely agree with you, except for one thing. What I used to say when I was a full-time teacher, and I still believe, I used to point out that the rules were different for kids everywhere in the building. The rules were different in my class, in Ms. Tobin's
Mm.
class, in Ms. Balraj's class, in the cafeteria, in the gym. And I used to say, can we just have one set of rules here?
Sure.
That to be mine, that to be yours, but there needs to be kind of a coherent school-wide culture so that the kids have a standard of behavior that is consistent, no matter where they are. And,
Yeah.
and then to further push on your idea, then as a teacher, I can evaluate the school and say, okay, is this school a good fit for my teaching style, for
Yeah.
my views about teaching and learning?
Sure.
And the administrators can make that decision about you. But I mean, I think, one of the worst pieces of advice I ever got in ed school was this thing about, oh, collaborate with your students on the rules. This way they'll feel invested.
Mm.
Maybe for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And I've been in school since then where there really is. You had my Success Academy book over your shoulder a moment ago. That was one of the real lessons I learned there, was the power of a coherent adult culture where all the
Mm.
adults, whether they walked in the door, on that page or not, having every adult in a child's life kind of singing from the same hymnal makes a big, big difference.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think this is gonna
Well,
come out backwards, but I pulled it off the
no, it looks good. It,
oh,
it
it is good.
works.
Great.
Yep.
I pulled it off because everything you're saying ties in great to your book, How the Other Half Learns. A fascinating study of a school that does have that intensely strong school culture. Yeah, I read a book on charter schools a few years ago by Thomas Sowell. Talked about it was very data driven and talked about some of
Yeah.
the successes they have in charter schools. The success you write about in this book from the Success Academy, it's phenomenal. I'd use the word unbelievable, but I know you saw all the things that went in to make it happen. Um, for our viewers who aren't familiar yet with this book, as they should be, what did you experience there? What did your experience teach you about the possibilities and limitations of charter schools?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a funny story. When I wrote that book, there's a website, you probably know it, the 74, that I contribute to
Yep.
from time to time.
Yep.
They asked me for a piece about the book, and I literally submitted the piece with the title, quote, "Here's my new book. I hope you hate it." And
Mm.
and not great marketing. They picked a different title, but I meant it earnestly. What
It's
I
actually
meant by
great.
that
It's
was,
actually great. It's great marketing.
well, thank you. But I meant it earnestly, and what I meant by that is, like, look, I'm a unabashed ed reform charter school guy, but I also kind of see nuance and complication, and I'm not eager to impose my beliefs or priors on other people. So
Mhm.
when I said, "Here's my new book, I hope you hate it," what I meant was, like, look, if you're a fan, like Thomas Sowell is, of charter schools, you're going to see things in this book that will validate your priors. But I hope you will also recognize there's things in here that are going to challenge your preconceived notions that you might not like. And just
Yes.
the opposite. Oh, you're a public school person. You don't like charters. Well, you're going to see things in here that will validate those views, but you're
Yep.
also going to see some things in here that you're going to be like, huh, maybe we should be doing some of those things.
Hmm.
Um, so unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's a nice problem to have. The reviews were nice. People seem to like the book, and do just the opposite. They only took from it the things that validated their priors. They
Of course.
tended to apply the things
Yep.
that didn't comport with their preconceived notions.
Hmm.
And both Nathaniel and I have been in public schools, I think, our whole career.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we want great outcomes for students. We believe in public schools, but that's what we want. We want students to succeed. And I did appreciate that nuance that I read in your book. It wasn't all on one side, it was examining the whole problem. There's a great line in there towards the end about equity and excellence, and I appreciate that concept of how
Yeah.
those two shouldn't be butting heads, but unfortunately, too often they do.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I mean I've only taught in low income urban settings, so I think that's something that is quite heartfelt for me, and I just wrote a piece. I think it hasn't even come out in print yet. It's only available online for Commentary Magazine. This is the next person you should have on your podcast is a guy named Stephen Wilson, who just wrote a book called The Lost Decade,
Mm.
that really unpacks this in great detail. He was the founder of Ascend Charter Schools. And got caught up in kind of, I mean, wokeness is not a word that I use
Mm.
often, but I'll use it for shorthand here, where this was a high achieving, rigorously academic charter school, and then his book details how that just fell out of favor. Even long before we were talking about critical race theory and
Hmm.
DEI the way we are right now. This was 10 years ago. It was, the so-called no excuses charter school
Yep.
movement was
Yep.
unraveling from within. He fell victim to it. But I think that's the clearest example I can cite of how this movement intentionally or unintentionally did end up really setting equity and excellence at war with one another, and
Mhm.
kids lost out.
Yep.
Hmm. So Robert, I'm fascinated with the idea of charter schools. I'm not as familiar. I didn't grow up with the charter school system.
Yeah.
I've always taught in public schools. So like, what are charter schools doing right in general? Where are they? And you might mention this just in your last comment. Where are they falling short?
Yeah.
And this might be a big question, and what can public schools learn from this?
Well, I'm going to challenge the premise of your question, Nathaniel, because
Okay.
at the end of the day, I don't think knowing that the word charter is over the door of the school tells me nothing about what's going
Mm,
on inside. It's a permission structure, is what it is. Chartering gives you permission to kind of play by a slightly different set of rules than the traditional public schools that you guys have worked in, that I worked
hmm.
in the South Bronx. Um, People who are charter fans, and I'm one of them, give me grief when I say what I'm about to say, but
Hmm.
those permission structures that charter operators have should make their schools better. Not just a little better, a lot better. Like
Mm,
when you get to have that kind of control over, your staffing and your curriculum and whatnot. And even if you're being honest, to a certain degree, student composition, well, then there's no excuse for it being a little bit better than I'm a fan of baseball, so I always use wins against replacement. If you know that, just be judging yourself based on your wins against replacement. The
Fair.
traditional school down the street, you should be a lot better because that's the reason you've been given this free hand. So this
mm.
is a long way of saying that. And I don't mean to push back on the question too
Yeah,
hard. I, I'm more interested in on how charter operators are using that permission structure to do good work for kids in ways that the public school system could learn from. Just knowing it's a charter doesn't necessarily scratch
gotcha.
that itch.
Well, no, I mean, I agree with that. And I think that, and I do a lot of work around schools across America. I don't work in charter schools.
Okay, by
I haven't
choice
worked.
or just by conviction?
It's just by connection. I've worked
Mm,
in private
okay,
schools. I've worked
okay,
in parochial, like Catholic archdiocese schools, but I haven't worked in like a Success
okay,
Academy or something like that,
okay.
like a network. But what I like what you're saying is in general, like they are able to have to like kind of like fight for excellence. They have to be excellent, right? I mean, like these
Just
charter
in my
schools.
opinion. Yeah. Or I do think 20 years ago, there was kind of a mindset that it was good enough to just be, to win on wins against replacement. You just had to be, better
Mm,
than the struggling school down the block. And if we're being honest, it probably wasn't that hard.
mm,
So it's only in more recent years that you're really seeing, okay, who are the real, winners here? And when I say winners, the ones who really have figured something out. Success Academy, I walked in there a few years ago because the data suggested that they were not just, winning, that they were secretariat at the Belmont. They were
mm,
winning by 31 lengths. So I wanted to get in there and figure out, what it was that they were doing that the rest of us could learn from.
mm.
But in general, I mean, getting back to your previous question, the real winners, so to speak, in charter world, and we know this from data from Stanford University's Credo Center. As a general rule, charters don't necessarily outperform district schools at large, but the
Mm,
real bright spots are urban charter schools that are part of networks, part of so-called CMOs or charter
mhm.
management organizations. The data is softening recently, but your uncommon schools, Achievement First, KIPP, Success Academy, Yes Prep, those have been the ones that have tended to outperform, their peer schools, not by a little, but by a lot.
Yeah. And
Robert, what struck me is some of the things that they do, or some of the things that I read about from Success Academy. I think going in, and I know you were in there for the whole year, correct?
Yeah, read the book. It was the conceit was I spent a year embedded. I mean, I visited a lot of their schools, but the narrative of the book takes place in one particular school, which was literally across the street from where I'd been a student teacher and a couple of blocks away from
mm,
where I taught fifth grade.
So I thought like all the kids would be super well behaved and there'd be no management issues, and that just
Right.
that wasn't the case. But I appreciated how they strived. Like you said, there was a unifying spirit, unifying culture. Every stinking minute mattered to them. I
Yep.
like the
mhm.
teacher who was like telling parents, if I'm sick, I'm coming here. Your kids, unless there's a death in the family or a hospital emergency, they need to
Yeah.
be here. That's how important at this school we take instruction. You need to be here on time. You need to have your uniform exactly as we request it. And Nathaniel, let me ask you a quick question. I'm gonna bring it back
Yeah.
to Robert. What do you think helped make your Title I school successful that you incorporated into your school?
My parents.
So, Robert, I think the parent piece was unbelievable. And like you mentioned, parents obviously had to be involved, and that's a selection feature of that school. Their demographics weren't any different from the demographics of the school that you student taught in. Okay, maybe they were a
Yes,
little.
no.
Okay,
Yes and no. And I'll say how they were, and I always say it had to be clear. This is not data because I don't have data on this. This was observation journalism, if you like.
sure.
Sure.
Um, there was a high number, a disproportionate number of intact families, like two
Okay,
Mm,
parent family,
okay, interesting.
which was certainly the exception in this. I think I may have said this in the book. I went on a second grade field trip with Success Academy Bronx One, and I'm not making this up. This is literally true. There were more dads chaperoning that field trip than
yeah.
I'd seen in 5 years of parent teacher conferences, and
Wow.
I could explain to you how that happens. It has something to do with the way they kind of structure their admissions process. But suffice it to say, parental involvement is key, and it's really, really hard to keep up with the parental demands at Success Academy as a single parent. And
Hmm.
look, some people look at that and they say that's creaming, and I look at that and say, well, why shouldn't kids in the South Bronx? Not every kid. We have these cliches about Nathaniel, you taught Title One, so you'll back me up on this,
Hmm.
I hope. We throw around these cliches like, oh, everybody's from a broken home, everybody's in poverty.
Yeah.
It undersells the degree to which some number of families are families and have supports, whether it's extended families, church relationships. They're living stable lives amid
Yeah.
neighborhoods that are disproportionately chaotic, but not entirely chaotic.
Hmm.
So when we assume that the chaos is the norm, then we sell short those the kids who have that grounding. Why shouldn't they get what my kid had?
Nathaniel, for your parents, what did you require of them, or what did they do? What would you say an involved
Great,
parent did
great
at your
question.
school?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll answer that. Remember, my frame of reference is a public school. right? Public
Yep.
schools. And I think that there is absolutely excellence at the edges. I think there are going to be highly successful charter schools who kind of like are kind of like those positive deviants, you know. And I think there's positive deviants in our public schools, whether in urban areas or rural areas. My area as a Title I principal was in urban suburban kind of Northern Virginia, and going back to but man, it was a disaster when we first came when I first got there. I mean, it was like 80% economically disadvantaged, 80% free uh, second language, and bottom 80% in the state. And in nine
Wow.
years, it was reverse. It was top 80th percentile in the state, top 20 percentile. But our parents, I couldn't make anyone do anything. Right. That
Mm.
was the thing. I can't make you wear a uniform. I can't make you do these things. I can't make you. But I had to have, like this charter schools, a
Yep.
consistent culture, systematic. Everything had to be very systematic. And for our parents, it was a constant reminder of vision and mission, and that we couldn't do our job alone. It was a very vulnerable kind of like ethos that we can only do so much, so much. You've got to be able to do this. You've got to be able to do this. And any decision that we tried to make, our parents and our families, we wanted them to have access to that decision making. Not perfect, but over time, I felt like we cracked the code. It was hard as hell, but we had to crack the code. And so that's where I think that a lot of public schools just fail because they forget that, yeah, we don't just teach students, we actually are teaching families, and we're also building communities inside and outside of our school as
Yeah.
well. So, yeah.
I mostly agree with that. The one, and I'm not suggesting this is true of your work, Nathaniel, but the one thing you've got to be on your guard against is assuming I'm not going to get buy-in, assuming I can't,
Sure.
enforce my norms, and therefore I'm not going to try.
Yep.
Let me be clear, it's damn hard, right?
Yes.
It's a lot easier when you are a school of choice, whether you're a public school of choice or a public charter school of choice. And when you've got this kind of dynamic, energetic, focused leader that is Eva Moskowitz, the founder of Success
Mm.
Academy. I think I said this in the book. If this woman was running a Fortune 500 company, she'd be very
Oh,
successful
sure.
because she has mastered the art of, corporate culture. Schools are not corporations, but I've been having, reflected on my previous career in the private sector. I don't recall ever seeing a private enterprise that had the coherent, cohesive
Mm.
culture that their schools had. And yes, it was a lot easier for her to kind of, through force of will, make it her own across her network of schools. That said, do you have the ability? I'm asking this rhetorically. I don't mean you,
Mm.
Nathaniel. Do you have the ability to hire for it and say, look, this is what we stand for, this is what we will not stand for, and if this is not for you, then this is not for you. Are you willing to kind of be the naggy school, as it were, like to
Mm.
say to parents, look, we all agree that this is how we do things here. You're not doing your part. One of the things that they do with Success Academy, I'm not saying they do it intentionally, but it's observable. If there's a behavior problem, mom gets called, and
Yeah.
mom has to leave her job as a minimum wage maid at the hotel in Midtown to come call her kid in for a landing. When that happens enough, then mom might make the decision, okay, this isn't worth it. I can't do this anymore. Well, what
Hmm.
happens if that same conversation happens at a public school?
Yeah.
Does she just stop coming in? And let's be really brutally honest, we've all had parents on the other end of the phone say to us, when he's in my house, he's my problem. When
Yeah.
he's in your school,
Hmm.
your problem,
Yep.
right? That's just truth. But I mean, the thing about, at least for kids, I'll tell you, this will sound like a diversion, but it's the same. It's the same
Hmm.
thing. The most powerful thing that I learned in reporting that book was the work of a behavioral economist named George Akerlof, who is, like, I should have known his work. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He's married to
Mm.
Janet Yellen, so he's not an obscure figure.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He's written a lot of papers about which I could summarize as kids just need to fit in. So, like, if you have a culture of achievement, kids will accommodate themselves to that culture.
Yeah.
They'll want to be smart, they'll want to get good grades, they'll take the test seriously because their friends do, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the real win of a cohesive, curriculum, not curriculum, culture that everybody buys into, is you can create that, hey, this is what I want to be a part of. it's more complicated to do that with parents, but it's not impossible. And
Yeah.
at the risk of repeating myself, we shouldn't assume that we can't get them on board.
Yeah.
Again, it's easier to do it in a school of choice, but that doesn't make it impossible for us to do it in public schools.
I want all of our public schools to have something, to be able to, like, I think about the outside the box ideas. Like, why not, give our public schools more, autonomy and more profession to kind of like operate with these type of structures? Like, it's the bureaucracy and the historic kind of like things that we put into place. It blows my mind sometimes. And, it's just like,
Okay,
what do we got to lose? So, you know what I mean? Like,
let
I'm
me
interested
throw
in
my
that.
pet idea by you. Yeah, okay. If you want
Yeah,
more autonomy, let me throw my favorite hobby horse by you. Okay.
there you go.
I used to kind of sotto voce, and now I just kind of lean into it. Like this is the last hill I'm going to die on in this work. And it's just math. So there are about 3.5 to 4 million. I think the exact number is 3.7 million teachers, full-time teachers in American classrooms. Okay, that's a
Yeah.
big number.
Yeah.
That is
Big.
bigger than doctors, lawyers, and engineers combined. So my
Mm.
point is, if we need that many teachers, then by definition, I'm not a teacher basher, but if you
Yeah.
got 3.7 million of anybody doing anything, you're talking about ordinary people, not saints and superstars, okay?
Mm,
Ordinary people who want to do a job, go home, pick up their kid, take them to soccer, put dinner on the table, etc. So this ethos, what we were talking about before, that it's the hardest job in the world to do well, easiest job in the
mm,
world to do badly. What's it going to take to make this job doable by the teachers we have, not the teachers
sure.
we wish we had? So
Yeah.
you want autonomy. Great. If you're a superstar, I want you to have autonomy, but most
Mm,
of us aren't. So
mm,
I have a real difficult time balancing that. Give the teachers autonomy with the
yeah.
reality the teachers are. I'm not a teacher basher, not because
Hmm.
they're not earnest and well intended, but because all we ever do in this work is ask them to do more and more and
Mm, hmm.
be an
Yep. Very true.
instructional expert, behavioral management with
Yep.
SEL, quasi-therapeutic. Now I'm
Sure, sure.
work.
Yeah,
And again, these are ordinary people. They are
yeah,
not Mother Teresa.
yeah,
So I want to hear your answer to this. How are you going to reconcile that with the
yeah.
reality of who's in our classrooms?
Systematic autonomy is what I'm taking. I don't want, first year teacher feeling like I'm a professional. I get to do whatever I want. That's not it. I'm talking
Okay,
about
because that's what's
systemic.
happening. You
Yeah, it's
realize
what
that's
happens, right? So,
yeah.
it's funny. I love Daniel Pink's work. He talks about, I think it's drive. We need autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which is great. I get it. But like systemic, like, so if I'm saying, if I'm this school in this neighborhood, and
Yeah.
for the last 50 years, I've done absolutely nothing, right? And we're afraid vouchers are going to, take kids out and we're going to close it down. And we've basically just done a piss poor job of educating, or then maybe the current bureaucratic structure is not more what we need.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't have to be a charter or something, but maybe it just needs to be, where can we systematically learn from these positive deviants? And maybe we need to just get out of our own way and systemically have that type of autonomy to do best and better.
Yeah, I am a unrepentant curriculum guy. This was one of the lessons that I learned, as a teacher in the South Bronx. I've told this story too many times. Like one of my first days in the classroom, asking in my naivete, "What's my curriculum? What am I supposed to
Sure.
teach?" My staff developer from Teachers College saying, "Well, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs," and like I am not.
Jeez.
I promise you.
I'm not.
Really?
I'm
Me?
25 years in this business. I'm still not the best person to know what a 10-year-old in the South Bronx needs to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that person who makes those decisions, to be honest. But the other problem, I'm sure you guys know
Yeah.
Emily Hanford and the Sold a Story podcast.
Yep. We sure
Right.
do.
The most recent episodes, she turns the lights up on a district in Ohio that I visited years ago, and they've made some news over the years. Steubenville, Ohio.
Yep.
One of the things that they do is stuff that we all hate. Oh, they do Success for All, and they've done it for 25 years. And,
Mm.
and it was fascinating in listening to her podcast when they talk about, she's asking teachers about balanced literacy. They've never even heard of it. Okay.
Mm.
But wrap your head around this, right? Like here
Yeah.
we are, forever looking for the new lever, the magic bullet, the thing that's going to engage every kid. Here's a district, a high poverty district in a former mill town, Ohio, that's killing it, and they're just doing boring old success for all, and they've been doing it for 25 years. They've had like zero turnover. Or
Mm.
maybe two superintendents, like the Red Sox have had right fielders. They had like three in
Sure.
40
Right.
years. District had the same thing with their
Yeah.
superintendents. When are we going to learn the lesson that,
Yeah.
gee, oh, you hate scripted curriculum. Oh, you hate box curriculum. But by the way, when the teachers don't have to spend all that time doing their own lessons from scratch, now they've got
Yep.
time to get feedback.
Yep.
Now they've got time to get better at their craft. Now they've got time to develop relationships with families. When you're not constantly, calling audibles at the line of scrimmage
Yep.
day after day after day, maybe this is a
Yeah.
job ordinary people can do well.
And I know you're big on core knowledge and Edie Hirsch, and we're talking to Mike Smoker a little while ago. And man,
Another great
I'm a fan of the basics.
being a fan of the basics, if I can interrupt, it's
Yep.
it's if you want to do the sexier stuff, you don't have permission in my mind until you've mastered the basics.
Mm. Yeah.
Like
True.
if you've only got 10 or 15% of your kids reading at grade level, I don't want to hear a damn thing about your new sexy, initiative. You
Yeah.
got a basic job that's not getting done yet.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I agree. I was just with a district that had, I think it was like six initiatives. And they were like, we've really pared it down. I'm like, just do one well. You're the
You
lowest
got one
performing school in
job.
your
The right
state.
one.
Job.
Just do one. Yeah, was it what was that movie? Not Blazing Saddles. The one thing. You know what I mean? I can't remember what it was. City Slickers. City Slickers. The one
Cities.
thing. Just do one thing well. Just get the kids to read, man. So anyway, that's great.
I've joked for years that I want to start an organization called the Coalition of Pretty Good Schools. Not, the it's the Coalition of Pretty Good Schools. Yeah, we've got a phonics-based curriculum. Yeah, the kids can all, do basic math. Yeah, it's a pretty orderly place. Just master the basics.
Average Academy. Let's do it.
Double
That
A.
would be above average, right?
That would be above average academy. There you go. Above. Hey,
Yeah.
triple A, above average academy.
Above
There you
There
go.
we go.
Okay.
Robert, it's tough. I think we've gotten to a place where, I mean, everything I think in our culture is polarized. And school choice. What's that?
I was joking. I said I hadn't noticed.
Yeah. How do we move forward with education with solutions that everyone can get behind, or is it just not possible?
I don't think you can.
Okay.
We've had a few laughs on this podcast, so let me be serious for a moment. One of the reasons that I became a choice advocate over the years is exactly that. Um, and and let me kind of unpack that for you. Like the standard narrative about school choice tends to be, oh, hey, that district school is lousy, demand choice. My narrative is like, hey, your district school might be fine, but maybe you'd like a classical school or project-based learning school or a STEM school or some such. In other words, there's so much variety in school culture and curriculum, that we are not taking advantage of. Um, in this kind of impoverished dialogue about choice. But I mean, your question, Eric, implies, I think, some of the more cultural things, like or culture war things, arguing over values and books and whatnot. And whenever this comes up, I always, can't help but asking, rhetorically but pointedly, do you know what we do in schools? Like, do you know what happens all day in a school? Adults who are not a child's parent make decisions on behalf of that child. Who are our heroes and villains? What are the values or the behaviors we praise and condemn? What are the books that are worth reading? What are the books that we don't think are worth reading? So in other words, the culture war is not exacting a toll from schools. We invented it in schools, okay? It's the work that we do. We literally are in the cultural transmission business. So to the degree to which we disagree about those broader issues is the degree to which it's simply not possible to do what you're suggesting. So once I think you see it that way, then choice is not only inevitable, but it's healthy. I don't want to impose my values on your child. I don't want you imposing, your values on mine. I've got some, fixed ideas about, curriculum and what's worth learning, but I don't feel the need to, to impose them on other people's children. If you agree with me, then come on along for the ride, so to speak. So I don't think that choice necessarily has to be this kind of, public school good, private school or choice mechanisms bad,
Yeah.
because we're all in this together. We're still all in this together. What I've said about choice now for a while is school choice, and things like ESAs and even homeschooling, it doesn't change who gets a public education. It changes who provides it. But at the
Mm,
end of the day, the public's interest is in the outcome. Kid
mm,
can read, a kid's got some ideas about, what he or she wants to do as an adult and can't wait to get started. Mission accomplished.
mhm.
Nothing in that suggests it has to happen under a public school roof, a private school roof, a homeschool roof. If a kid is educated and feels invested in and prepared for a productive adult life, that's a win. And
Yep.
I cannot be made to care how that happens as long as we get that win.
Mm, mhm.
Nathaniel, why should he care?
Man, I tell you what, I listen, as a father, I always I wear a lot of hats. The most important hat, Robert, that I wear is always my dad hat. You know what I mean? And
You and me both.
selfishly, I want my kids to have the absolute best education possible,
Not
right?
selfish. That's not selfish at
Absolutely.
all. If
Yeah, yeah.
every parent felt that way,
Don't
it'd be
call me
great.
selfish, right? Yeah. So, but I don't want them to have that at the expense of other kids. You know what I mean? And I think that's the odyssey. I want every
Yeah,
kid to have my last name. I do. I want every kid to be to be a Provencio, right?
you're
And
Tyreek Hill. My God.
I'm trying. Well, yeah, trying a
Elon
little bit
Musk.
more, little bit more. I only got two. But
Good.
but like, let's say you're right. Let's say neighbor down the street, they want to have homeschool. To go for it, do it. The ends justify the means. I want every kid to be able to contribute to our society. What I worry about is the narrative and the conversation about it, and it's right and
Yeah,
left that I think is trying to create this black and white scenario, which I think I worry about.
yeah,
I think
I do
that
too.
public schools. Listen, I'll be honest with you. A lot of public schools need to get their act together. And it might mean that they're going to be losing kids and families because their business was not a good business model. They weren't serving kids.
Yeah,
And maybe it takes a loss of customers. Robert, when I was a principal, we opened up. We had we had school choice. Gotcha, man. We had school choice, and it didn't matter where you lived. You can go to any neighborhood you want as long as there were seats required. And I was
right.
hemorrhaging kids and families just because of where we were. And I was like, I don't want to lose any kids and families. So I want to be the best school available.
Right.
That there's just so much bureaucratic stuff that gets in the way, and people lead how they were led, and we've got to have some kind of shakeup. So there, this is a very zeitgeist moment, I think, a little bit with the
Yeah,
conversations. I just don't like the way it's
yeah.
framed. It's framed
But
of a
I,
versus
I
kind
was
of,
a slightly different a set of concerns. I just gave a talk about this at AEI where I work a couple of weeks ago. And again, I remember saying to to my audience for this talk, like, I know I'm going to sound like I'm not a school choice guy right now,
right.
but just trust me, I really am. But that said, because everything in this work is complicated, right? There's some
Yeah.
Yes.
complications with choice that we need to face up to. One is the idea that if the most engaged parents are the choosers, then the schools that you and I have worked in become the school of last resort for the
That's
non-choosers.
right.
And then you really create you go from bad to worse. School choice
Yes.
becomes very, very good for those with active engaged parents and very, very bad for those without. That's one. The other one that concerned me is social cohesion. Like
Hmm.
I'm again an unrepentant E.D. Hirsch core knowledge guy. You want to talk about equity and excellence. I gravitated towards his work because to me, that's what equity and excellence looks like.
Yeah.
It means ensuring that every child has access to the same, what I like
Yes.
to call array of mental furniture that
Mm.
well-off kids have. We can have me back on another time. We'll talk E.D. Hirsch
Yeah, man.
till we're
Love
blue
it.
in the face. But that idea, it to say it differently, public schools may have failed, but the public school ideal is still worth saving. In other
Yeah.
words, that Horace Mann idea of what was his phrase? Public education is the balance wheel of machinery or of
Mm,
sorry, the great equalizer of the conditions of man. Lovely
Yep.
sentiment. As
mm,
Americans, who doesn't
mm.
want that? The problem is we're just not that damn good at delivering it,
Yeah.
right? but I don't want us to lose touch and find that sentiment wanting, because it's a lovely sentiment and it's worth trying for. So if you go into a system where everyone chooses their own adventure, so to speak, then you're abandoning that idea that, hey, look, there's a certain body of knowledge that literate people know and expect you know too. And we got to make
Yes.
sure as educators that you have that. Otherwise, we're doing you a disservice. So in again, a choose your own adventure system, that might not be what's on the front of people's minds. It's still, I'm still an unapologetic choice guy because I've worked in schools. I say this all the time. The school I worked in the South Bronx 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it was the lowest scoring school in New York City's lowest scoring district. And you know what it is today? New York City's lowest performing
Yeah.
school in New York
Right.
City's lowest performing district. The children of my former students are now in that school. What possible right do I have to say to them, "Oh, don't worry, we're working on it. We'll fix it. Just be patient." For another generation, please,
Mm.
God, no.
Robert, last question. First, I'm gonna again put up your book. Any new books coming out? Again, you have your Substack the next 30 years. Where else can people find you or connect with you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the subs. I should be working on a book. That's what we do in think tanks. We produce deathless papers and books. So, please don't tell my paymasters that I haven't come up with a new book yet. But I mean, the Substack, it really is kind of where my heart is right now, and I mean it earnestly. I've been saying for a while now that if we'd spent the last 30 years trying to improve, what teachers do, as opposed to assuming they know what to do and just holding them accountable, that we'd be better off. So I'm going to work that idea like a mine now, and really do, in whatever little time I have left in this work, really push this idea that, hey, we do have those 3.7 million teachers out there, and they've got to be good. Takeaway of Emily Hanford's podcast, we mentioned her earlier. For years, we've blamed teachers for not producing results. Emily Hanford comes along and basically shows us it's not their fault. They were sold a story about
Yes.
literacy. So once you see that, how can you continue to hold them accountable? But that doesn't mean we can't hold ourselves accountable for ensuring the teachers understand what good practice is and what bad practice is and what's the difference.
Love it.
And I think it's that introspection, it's that goal to be able to look at our fingers or our fingers and say, there's three fingers pointed back at me, and you know what I mean, more than anything else. And I think we're all, complicit and not demanding more. So that's why this book is
You're
awesome,
here.
and I love it, man. And you're an advocate for thinking
Thanks.
outside the box, and and sometimes just thinking inside the box, right? I mean,
Just thinking.
just
Thinking.
thinking, just think. Just think about boxes. I love it. I love it. Robert Pondiscio, thanks so much, man. We really appreciate it. And we can't wait to have you back, man. Do some more debating, a little conversation. I love it,
Won't
brother.
have to ask twice. I do a lot of these things, and I have never enjoyed one as much as I just enjoyed this one. So this will take away.